All right, let's talk about Hebrews 11. If you've spent any time with the Bible, you probably know this one. It's the famous faith chapter, a text that, honestly, most of us feel like we've got a pretty good handle on. But what if, and this is a big what if, there's a completely different way to read it that changes everything? When you think of the chapter, these are the names that pop into your head, right? It's always presented as this kind of spiritual hall of fame, a list of heroes, all-stars, and role models we're supposed to look up to for their incredible faith. And don't get me wrong, it's a super inspiring list, for sure. But here's where we're going to throw a little wrench in the works. What if, by pulling this chapter out, treating it like its own little island, we're actually missing the entire reason the author wrote it in the first place? What if the real power of this chapter has been hiding in plain sight all along? To find that power, we have to do something that sounds simple but is actually pretty radical. We need to put the chapter back where it came from. Because as one particular scholar argued, when you're looking at scripture, context isn't just important, it's everything. That scholar was a guy named E.W. Bullinger. And his whole philosophy was simple but, really profound. You just can't understand a single piece of a text until you see how it fits into the bigger picture. For him, trying to interpret a chapter all by itself was like watching one 5-minute scene from a movie and thinking you understood the whole plot. It just doesn't work. And Bullinger was definitely the right guy for this kind of detective work. He was this incredibly meticulous scholar from the 19th century, even earned a doctorate for his deep dive analysis of biblical languages and structures. You could say his whole life's work was about finding the hidden blueprints in the text. So to figure out Hebrews 11, Bullinger didn't just zoom in on it with a microscope. Nope. He did the exact opposite. He zoomed way out to look at the entire letter to the Hebrews and find its architectural pattern.
And wow, this is what he found. It's fascinating. Bullinger realized the letter is built like a perfect symmetrical arch. The technical term is a chiasm. Now just look where our chapter is. See it? Hebrews 11 isn't some standalone section. It's embedded deep inside that big block called special application.
So what does that mean? It means the chapter we think we know so well doesn't really start at 11:1. The whole argument actually kicks off way back in chapter 10, and it doesn't wrap up until the very end of chapter 12. This completely changes how it functions. It's not just a list anymore. It's the middle of a much, much bigger thought. And here's the blueprint of that bigger thought. It's basically a sandwich. The famous Hall of Fame is intentionally squeezed between two urgent calls for endurance. The author starts by saying, you need to endure. Then he gives all the evidence in chapter 11, and he finishes by saying, therefore, because of them, let's endure. The list serves the argument. It isn't the argument itself.
Now, the pivot point for this whole section, the real key that unlocks the entire argument, it's a single powerful quote from the Old Testament prophet Habakkuk, and the author places it right before he launches into that list of heroes.
Okay, so get this. This one verse is kind of like a New Testament superstar. It gets quoted 3 times, but each time with a different word in the spotlight. In Romans, the stress is on faith. In Galatians, it's on the just. But right here in Hebrews, the emphasis shifts completely. It's about how the just shall live by faith. The focus moves from the idea of faith to the daily practice of living it out. And this is where it all clicks. That emphasis on living by faith perfectly matches the quote's original home. Back in the book of Habakkuk, the entire context is about patient waiting. The prophet is told to go stand on a watchtower and just wait for a promise that feels like it's taking forever. The command isn't just to believe, it's to wait for it, to live in a state of faithful endurance.
So when we read chapter 11 with this new framework in mind, the whole thing just transforms. It stops being a gallery of heroes to admire from afar and becomes this powerful, practical lesson in what it actually means to endure.
And you know what? The text says this flat out. It's not even hidden. The author points out that these famous figures lived their entire lives by faith without ever actually getting the ultimate promise. Their faith wasn't defined by one big moment of victory. It was defined by a lifetime of waiting, of living like strangers and exiles, trusting a promise they could only see from a distance. So with all this context, we get a new definition. Faith, in Hebrews 11, isn't just a belief you hold in your head. It's the patient endurance that makes it possible to live, to keep going, to persevere,
while you're waiting for God's promise to be fulfilled. It's an active, gritty, living thing.
And this is what connects all the dots. All those examples in chapter 11 aren't just there for us to admire. They are presented as evidence, as a great cloud of witnesses whose lives are all shouting one central message. And that message is delivered right after the list ends. Therefore, since we're surrounded by them, let us also run our race with patience. So the takeaway here isn't just be like Abraham. It's more like look at how Abraham endured and learn from that. This reframes the entire chapter from a story about past heroes to a practical blueprint for our present struggles, which leaves us with a pretty big question. How does seeing faith not just as belief, but as active, patient endurance change the way you view the long-term challenges in your own life?